Network Automation Nerds podcast. Hello, welcome to Network Automation Nerds podcast, a podcast about network automation, network engineering, Python, and other technology topics. I'm your host, Eric Cho. Today, I am super excited, and I don't want to waste any time because there's so much gold to be dig out of this person that I'm welcoming back from part one. So in part one, we talked to Russ White about kind of his career path and how he became so proficient in so many different fields. And if you missed that episode, I really, really encourage you to go back because it's going to be very relevant to what we're going to talk about in part two. In part two, we're going to talk about his recommendation on, people who just coming out of college, for example, people who's been kind of mid-career or maybe just 3 to 5 years into their career, and people who's been 10 plus years. What would be his recommendation on which direction to go? And I cannot wait to dive into this. I want to bring back a little bit of what you talked about, Russ. On you started with the why, right? You talked about your electronic background and eventually getting to routing, but you were never satisfied with just living in other people's reality bubble, should we say? They create these show commands and you're like, well, why does the show command do this? So I want to hear more about that. And why don't we start with I guess people who just right out of college, right? Like, what would you recommend them do or learn, or what is the direction?
Yeah, so if you're right out of college, now, of course, this might be somebody who's just coming into the career field as well, right?
Yes.
Who's just starting. Either way, I think the biggest thing that you need to do is to start building a mental map of everything. Find a way to model internally. Now, I use a model personally. I call the 4 things model. I've been writing on it on packet pushers, and it's just my thing, right? I'm not saying it's the right thing. Don't ever take anybody's. Oh, you should do the right thing. The right thing is the OSI model. The right thing is the DOAD model, TCP, whatever. Whatever. Who cares? Do what works for you, but you do need to find a way to build a mental map. And by the way, this is not something that I intentionally did from the time I started in any of these fields. This is actually something that I encountered when I did my PhD.
Okay. In philosophy, nonetheless, right?
In philosophy. And that's actually what happened was like, I'm talking to my major professor before he was my major professor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I don't know anything about philosophy. He's like, look, if we can get you a mental map of philosophy, then you'll be able to take all the philosophy bits and integrate them into what you already know. And I'm like, what's a mental map? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so he goes off on this thing about you have to understand the basic branches. Like in philosophy, it's really the basic branches and the history.
Okay.
It's who is the philosopher, who are they reacting to, and how are they reacting to that person, which then develops their way of seeing things. Like, okay, Socrates is all about asking questions. And then Plato's like, okay, enough with the questions. We need to figure out like how we find truth.
Yeah.
Right? You can ask questions all day long, and you can tear down everybody else's idea of truth. But what are you doing to find truth for yourself? Like, what is your definition of truth? And then so Plato does this, I'm going to talk about the forms and this, that, and the other, which is a lot more than you think it is. And, and everybody remembers Plato for the Republic, but in reality, his more important work is probably the law, because he tried to apply the Republic in the real world and it didn't work.
Okay.
So he ended up writing the law to say this is really the way things work. So it's better. Anyway, and then you get Aristotle, right? And Aristotle's like, all this knowing about truth is great, but how do individual people live? So like you're just understanding like, what is the purpose? What is this person asking questions about?
Yeah.
How are they answering them? And why are they asking those questions? And that's kind of how you build a mental map of philosophy, is going through the history. And things like, okay, before Descartes, everybody was worried about ontology. What is truth? After Descartes, everybody's concerned about epistemology. How do I know truth? And if you might read anything in the modern world in philosophy, it's all about how do I know truth? I mean, everything is about justified true beliefs and warrant and all this other stuff. And so just understanding like those kinds of things builds a mental map. I can take a single philosopher I've never heard of before I can place them inside this historical timeline. I kind of have an internal. I mean, I have it written down too, so I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
memorize it all. And say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, where do they fit? Who are they reacting to? Like,
Mm.
what are they coming from? Okay, same thing in the networking world,
Yeah.
right? This is the four things model for me. Is the reason I do this is because I'm like, okay, what is the problem I'm trying to solve?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the full range of possible solutions, and how does this particular protocol solve that problem?
Right.
Because there's no new ways of solving these things. All these things are being solved the same way they've always been
And
solved.
you talked about the compromises that each of
Yeah,
your
right.
solutions making.
Yes, exactly. And so that's the mental model. That's the mental map, right? Is you kind of build a mental map of what you're going to. It's like building an outline for a book. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to write a book, you build an outline. Why do you build an outline? So you can get the flow, so you can get the pieces, you make sure you cover everything. It's the same thing with a mental map in networking or engineering of any kind. You're just building like an outline, basically. And using like a mind map piece of software or something like that would be really good for doing this. I've never done it, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that'd be a really good thing to do because, you're like sitting there going, okay, if I look at routing, what is routing really trying to solve?
Right.
What are the fundamental questions I need to answer here?
Yeah.
And that's all it is. And so once you build that mental map, the cool thing is that you can just apply it to everything, like everything. So coming out of college, if I were in that position, I'd be trying to build a mental map. One and two, I'd be trying to get hands-on experience.
Okay.
I'd be in the lab. I'd be
Mm-hmm.
like backing up my mental map
With
and
experiments.
understanding the theory with the experience, right?
Yeah.
And not just doing other people's labs. Like,
Yeah.
okay, in theory, BGP should react this way.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's go see what it does. Like, let's not just accept that that's what it should do. Let's go see what it does,
Yeah.
right? How do you learn how BGP converges? You set up BGP networks in the lab, and you do in very stilted, very weird topologies that don't exist in the real world
Yeah.
that force BGP to act in certain ways. And then once you've done that, you can take out links and take out speakers and go, oh, I can actually see the process step by step by step. And now I understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is totally unscripted too, Russ. But see, like I dig out this book,
Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah,
you
of the
go.
shortness of life, just because you're all talking about philosophy. I'm like, okay, I'm now inspired to read this book because, as
Yeah.
you could tell, like it's not even open, but
Yeah. Yeah. No.
but it's right within reach.
Yeah.
But no, I like that the mental model, and you kind of it's kind of like the first degree, right? Like you eliminate everything else and just simplify it down into the first degree and say, what is the routing protocol trying to solve? In particular, how does BGP solve these issues that they're trying to solve?
Right. And look for patterns, right?
Look for
Look for
patterns.
patterns. Look for patterns. ISIS and OSPF are very similar protocols. They're not the same. I
Mm-hmm.
always used to joke when I taught ISIS and OSPF in TAC. I would like teach OSPF first, and I would get to the end of OSPF and I'd say, okay, now it's time to learn ISIS. Just forget half of everything you already know about OSPF,
Which
and you
half
know
though?
right. But still,
Every
right?
other line.
Yeah, every other line. Now you know ISIs.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, it's not quite that simple. But still, like it is. They're similar enough that if you think about how SPF works, right, and think about how flooding works,
Yeah.
then you can really understand like what's going to happen. You can take a network diagram and say, this link fails. I know exactly how this is going to converge.
Yeah.
I can build a time chart. I can build a timeline and say at time one it's going to do this. At time two it's going to do this. At time three it's going to do that. Now there may be changes because things change and blah blah blah. But generally speaking, I know how this is going to converge by looking at it. I don't need to actually see it happen. But backing it up with things that doing it in the lab is really good because then you can integrate that knowledge
Yeah.
into what you're doing. So that's kind of I think that's the two things that I think I would be focused on if I were just coming out of school or something like that.
Yeah.
College degrees tend to be much more focused than they used to be,
Mm.
for better or worse. They tend to be much more single issue things. I'm going to teach you to code Java.
Yeah.
That's a college degree nowadays, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And you're teaching at University of Colorado, so you
yeah,
have firsthand experience or
yeah. And
um
I'm contrary to the whole thing.
yeah.
I teach a master's level class, and it's basically a mental map class. It's
Mm.
That's what it is. It's a I'm going to throw all sorts of information at you about lots of things so that you have an idea of what IoT is, so that you have an idea of how encryption works. I'm just going to throw everything at you. And so it's like 14 weeks of total fast as you can go learning every topic. And of course,
Mm.
every student's going to have some topics they already know.
Yeah.
So they can relax that week. And then, so that's basically that course is just a let's just go and hit every field in network engineering, all of them, everything from everything, right?
Yeah.
I'm not teaching modulation. I mean, I went into modulation principles and stuff in this new book, which is actually something I've never done before, believe it or
Uh-huh.
not.
Okay. Well, you see, no, well, yeah, I want to talk about, you double click on what you're talking about before on your advice, though, because I think, let me play devil's advocate a little bit, because I think the problem of doing what you said before, Russ, is, um, it's so they're under when you're a new grad, you're under pressure to actually perform on the job, right? You need
That's right.
something that you could, like a command line, like how do you construct a BGP neighbor? These are the 4 lines that you form, and I type
Yeah.
into Cisco,
Mm-hmm.
Juniper, or whatever. And going down to the fundamentals, you're spending all these time
Mm-hmm.
that may or may not be all to translate into your job for tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would be your answer for that?
Yeah. So I'm contrary to everybody.
Okay.
All of my career advice is
It's
contrary.
Ross against everybody else.
Yeah, I'm contrary to everybody about this. I think my perspective is that engineering is like. I actually have a presentation that I did for UT and I've done for USC and other places, and
Okay.
it's incorporated in the UC class as well. Is like engineering to many people is like a treadmill. Like
Okay.
the technology is thrown at you, and you're on a treadmill trying to learn. Oh, Juniper came out with this new feature. I need to learn the commands for that.
Yeah.
Oh, Cisco came out with a new feature. I need to go, or there's this new thing called EVPN. I need to go learn the configuration commands for Juniper, Cisco, et cetera, et cetera. And what I really want to do is if you build the mental map, you jump off the treadmill. You stop learning the commands.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's a lot of work. And yes, it takes 5 to 10 years
Mm-hmm.
at least, right, to do it. But once you've done it, you're off the treadmill. And instead of
Mm.
somebody saying, oh, there's this new thing, EVPN, let's go learn how to configure it, you say, oh, what problems does that solve?
Right. Or how does that fit into
How
that?
does that fit into the
Yeah.
larger picture?
Right.
How is it? So I already know there's only 4 solutions to this problem. Which
Okay.
one did they choose? And then when you approach a configuration, your question becomes, all right, if I'm configuring BGP, I know that BGP does not have automatic neighbor discovery. Well, some do now, but typically for an EBGP session, most of the time in inter-provider connections, I don't. So I
No, you
need to
don't
go.
want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to do that, right? So
Yeah.
now I need to know. I need to ask. I need to query the configuration, right? How do I go about configuring this? Rather
Mm-hmm.
than having the commands memorized,
Yeah.
you're learning what questions you need to ask and what you need to look for in the CLI,
Yeah.
and it turns the entire situation around. And once you do that, then you freed yourself up to learn new protocols very quickly and to expand your horizons. So I would always begin with build the mental map. I know it takes time. I know it's hard. When you're configuring stuff, drive your coworkers crazy with, yeah, I see this configuration, but why?
Yeah.
Why do we configure BGP that way?
Right.
And go look it up,
Yeah.
right? Go find out. Don't just go, oh, that's what the command does. No. What does that do in BGP? What
Mm-hmm.
does that do in OSPF? Go find the specification. Okay, if you're crazy enough, go grab a copy of FR routing and find that command in the command structure
Yeah.
and figure out what bits it twiddles in the configuration files and then what happens in the code when you make that change.
Mm-hmm.
Like really seriously, then you'll understand like what the protocol is doing. And once you understand that, then you can turn the situation around from how do I configure this to what am I trying to get done,
Yeah.
right? What's my goal here? Now that I
That's
have a
a
goal.
that's a great point, because I mean back then, when at least when you and I started, or you started much more earlier than I did, but we didn't have FR routing, we didn't have Quagga,
That's right.
we didn't have like all these lab equipment that are virtualized. We actually have to haul in like the AG what is it,
AGS
AGP?
Plus.
Yeah, AGS Plus, like those white hunky, like it sounded like it's about to take off
NGS.
from my
Yeah.
basement, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so now you have all these tools, DPTK, as you mentioned, that are just excellent in trying things out without a lot of risk. So that becomes I'm not saying it's free, like free as in free of effort, but it's a lot easier
Yeah, it takes
of
time. It
yeah,
still takes a lot of time, clearly. It still
clearly.
takes a lot of effort. You have to learn things, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Again, the first part of my career, I would be focused on flipping the script,
Okay.
getting from configuring things by rote to understanding how like asking the questions that help me learn do the configuration. And by the way, this drives me nuts when I'm in interviews. I've actually had people ask me, if you were on a Juniper router and you wanted to make BGP do this, what configuration command would you use? And I'm
Oh my
like,
god.
I'm like,
It unleashes the wrath.
Google? Yeah, is there no search engine that I can use here? Like why would I want to memorize that, right?
Yeah.
Like because it's going to change in 5 years anyway, or it should
Right.
change. And frankly, when you get to intent-based networking and automation, you really don't care about those configuration commands
Or you just
because
add
now,
chat GPT or whatever, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I don't need to know that stuff. And so, like for the CCIE, I do because the
Hmm.
CCIE is all about speed. Fine,
Yeah.
let's get past the CCIE. But once you're past the CCIE, get yourself to the point where you are beyond learning the commands and you're learning the protocols and the whys so that you can ask questions and figure out what the configuration should look like, what you expect to look for. That's my if you're young in this in you're young in the field, that's where I would start. That's
Mm.
really where I would start.
Well, is that the same advice? Would you change anything? I mean, I sense a little bit of a tweak when you say get past the CCIE, right? So for people who's, I don't know, 3 to 5 years into their career, so maybe
Maybe
they've
eight to
done a
ten
little
years, maybe 8 to 10 years even.
8 to 10 years. All
Let's
right.
not pressure people into thinking they have to be done at 3 to 5 years,
Okay.
right? Some people might be. I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't want to pressure anybody and say if you're 5 years in and you haven't done this, then you really stink. No, that's not the point. that's
I'll be in that
that's the
category, right? Like 5 years in, I'm still like trying to pass my CCIE. That's
yeah.
a fact, right?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And it wasn't 5 years for me. I don't
Yeah.
think. I think it was much longer than that. I have no
Mm.
idea what it really was. But again, I was raised asking why. So it's much, I've never done the pure configuration thing in my
Yeah.
life. It's never been that way for me. So anyway, so yeah, when you get beyond that though, my thing would be to add breadth,
Okay.
right? Read philosophy,
Mm.
read business, get out of your comfort zone, read crypto,
Yeah.
like, you know, learn what other people do for a living and how they do it.
Yeah.
Really broaden out. And that's not going to help you. That is really not going to help you specifically in your networking career. But there's more to life than your career. There's being a
Mm.
whole person, right?
Right.
You want to be a whole person.
For
And
sure.
so to be a whole person, at some point you've got to look up from the workbench out the window and say, oh, there's grass out there. If you walk outside, the graphics are incredible. Like the
Yeah.
DPI rate is so much better than it is on the screen. Just saying.
Like instead of doing virtual reality, you actually take off the
Yeah, you
glass and go,
take it
"Oh
off
wow,
and
you
yeah,
can actually touch
exactly.
this."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a definite point in your career where you kind of turn and you say, okay, now I've built the mental map.
Yeah.
And I've encountered 2 or 3 new protocols, and I felt very comfortable at
Mm-hmm.
being able, or 2 or 3 new networks, and I felt very comfortable at like understanding how they're going to converge
Yeah.
without actually having to work on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this is something that's really cool you can do. You can actually go look at other people's networks. Facebook will sometimes post a research paper. Now that's not their current network.
Sure.
That's some older network.
Sure.
Don't let them fake you out and think that's what they currently run, because that's
With
not the way it
thousands of
works.
lines of
Yeah,
connectivity.
whatever. Yeah, and just think to yourself, like if you see an undersea a map or a map of a large provider network, you can be like, how would I design BGP?
Yeah.
What would I do to make it run on that network? And then
Yeah.
compare to what they've done as much as you can.
Mm.
And like bolster yourself, gain confidence in your own skill set. And once you're to the point where you have fairly good confidence, spread out. Like learn crypto,
Mm,
like learn security, learn app security, learn to code, learn, I don't know, philosophy, learn stuff. Get
yeah.
out and learn stuff.
Yeah.
Because the more stuff you know like that, the more effective you're going to be as a person in a wider range of environments. And soft skills, although Mike Bouchon hates that term. He doesn't like the word soft skills. He calls them superpowers.
Yeah, superpowers. What's your superpower? Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I do enjoy listening to. I think I enjoy listening to the podcast for the Hedge podcast so much is because of the breadth that it brings, right? Like I especially enjoy the forum type of like a panel type of discussion, right? Because everybody brings a little bit on. I mean, the last episode I listened to was for network automation, right? And then you have, I think it was Yvonne who was saying, do you even need network engineering? Right? Like, I don't think she
yeah,
specifically said that, but she's just like, okay, this thing carried us for so long, and maybe it's time to just move on or whatnot, right? So
yeah,
that
yeah.
actually brings a whole new perspective to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Oh well, yeah. I think there'll always be network engineers.
Okay.
I just do. I mean, it's like electronics engineers. There'll always be electronics engineers. But when I first started in electronic engineering, the electronic engineers were in the field.
Yeah.
Now they're in laboratories
Mm,
and offices. They're not in the field anymore for the
right.
most part.
Right.
And the same thing with car mechanics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, we grew up and it was like, okay, we need a car. So we go down to the state auction and buy a car, and it'd be like, you get it home and you're like, no, the head's got to be pulled. It's leaking oil or something. So we'd actually rip the engine down, and put it back together. And those kinds of people still exist,
Yeah.
but they're just more rare than they used to be.
Yeah.
Most car work nowadays is done in an office, honestly, by some engineer who's sitting there designing. If this happens, I'm going to have it spit out this code.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
Right.
that's the real engineering work that happens. And then the guy sitting there working on the car, or the woman working on the car, whatever it is, they're going to say, well, I get this code, so I go look at this manual, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not necessarily as much engineering, that's more operational work, right?
Right. Right.
And so the engineering still happens. We'll still need network engineers. It's just a matter of where it happens.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I remember trying to turn off my like change oil light the other day, and I looked into it, and it wasn't like before, like you punch in some kind of trick punches of like buttons, but it's you do these ODB2 like things that you
Yeah.
plug in, and you use your
Mm-hmm.
mobile phone to turn off. So I think that goes back to what you were talking about, how we will always need this context, but they may happen differently.
Mm-hmm.
And like what Steve Jobs was saying, right? We still need like back when the car was first invented, it was all trucks. Well, we still have trucks, but now we have sedans and SUVs, and so
Yeah.
the people who
Right.
are working on trucks, so it's a very limited amount of people. So
Yeah.
maybe same thing is applicable for network engineering.
Yeah, and I also don't want to make it sound like network engineering is going to move strictly into hyperscalers and stuff like that, because that's
Right.
not true. I don't think.
Right.
I think network engineering, like, again, we have people who work on cars not just for pleasure but for a living, who
Mm-hmm.
are real technicians on the car side still. They're not as
Right.
common as they used to be, but there are still people out there who rebuild engines. I mean, in corner shops, there are still people out there who build race cars in
Right.
corner shops.
Right.
They still do this stuff and they still understand the engines really well. They don't all work for auto manufacturers, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Networking is be the same thing. There may be fewer companies, and actually, I think there's a pushback now against the cloud. It's starting to happen. I think we're starting to see the pushback against the cloud.
Yeah. Not everything could move to the cloud.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're starting to see a bit of pushback. And I think that, most companies will still have network engineers. They
Mm-hmm.
just may be fewer. They
Right.
just may be, higher level and fewer, or whatever you want to say, which then poses the problem of how you build these people,
Mm-hmm.
because that is an issue, right? When you have fewer of them and they work in an office,
And
or
they need a lot more breadth, right? Because now
yes,
you have the
right.
overlays and underlays.
Yeah. And so how do you build those people, right?
Yeah.
That's always a hard question. I don't know the answer to it most of the time, because college education doesn't always get you there. Certifications don't always get you there. And so, right. So, where are modern, like if you look at a car manufacturer today, where do the people who work on, who design engines come from?
Yeah.
Right? They come out of graduate programs, sure, but there's fewer opportunities for somebody to go to a corner garage and rip down or in their own garage and rip down an engine
Yeah.
and learn how it works. So there's a smaller pool of people from which to draw to do that.
But the
And
knowledge required for that smaller pool is much deeper. So how do you
yes,
short circuit the 15 to 20 years that
yeah,
require to to
yeah,
maybe you to get there, um,
yeah.
and get there
The
faster?
I don't know the answer to that. That's hard to me. That's a hard question. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, you get to a point in your career, you should learn to write, you should learn to speak, you should learn to like go speaking engagements, you should learn to mentor people, you
Yeah.
should pick up other skills beyond just the networking skills,
Yeah.
network engineering skills, and that's kind of the turning point to me. That's where that's like second stage of your career,
Yeah.
is to do that stuff. So that's kind of the way I see career progression. Like if I'm interviewing somebody who's just out of college, my primary questions are going to be around: are they the type of person that's going to ask why?
Hmm.
Or are they just going to spit configuration commands at me? Like,
Right.
what is their personality? That's my main thing.
Okay.
When they get beyond 5 to 10 years, then I'm less interested in do they know how to configure stuff and more interested in tell me about the last white paper you wrote. Like,
Mm.
tell me about like
I would have failed on that.
yeah, but well, I mean, or some other things. Like for you, a podcast, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell
Yeah.
me about your podcast,
Well,
right?
thank you.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, what is your communication skills? I'm trying to get at your communication skills. I'm trying to get at your other skills, your superpowers,
Right.
more so than your basic network engineering skills.
Right.
And of course, I don't. I'm actually thinking about doing a thing on interviewing skills for Pearson. I've been kicking it around for a long time, and I need to go do it. I need to do the slides and do everything
Yeah.
because I don't interview like most people do either. I mean, I'm contrary to everything most of the time. It's just not a thing with me. I'm
Yeah.
just,
We could tell by the last hour of your talk. You're just like it's me and there's everybody else.
yeah, there's me and there's everybody else. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. I don't
Yeah,
care.
that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
No, I buy that. I mean, I have this book called exactly called Self Skills by John Somes. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously there's some other things that happen with his attitude and so on, but I mean that book itself really helped me as far as just
Good. Yeah.
branching out and a lot of what you talked about on yeah, your first code is going to suck, but just go learn it nonetheless, right? it's
Yeah.
it's going to
That's
add to
right.
your dimension.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Hey, when I worked for TAC, when I first came into Cisco TAC,
Yeah.
the way it worked was is we had certain people we knew everything. Like we had this guy who was
Like
who
your
was
SMEs. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we had the guy who was the ISIS coder. There was
Mm.
one ISIS coder in all of Cisco
Mm.
when I was in tech. He was the only guy, and
Yeah.
he's a nice enough guy. I like him a lot. I still talk to him today. He's really cool.
Yeah.
But or like Tony Lee. Tony Lee was well known for this as well. Tony Lee was like the router architecture dude because he designed he designed the first silicon switching engine for the 7500.
Oh wow.
And so, you would email these people and you would know that it was going to come back. The answer was going to come back with a lot of cuss words and a lot of anger.
Yeah, things that you can't repeat on the show
Yes.
today. Yeah.
But you were going to get an answer.
Yeah.
And so you just put your fireproof suit on and you go do it.
Yeah.
So what if I ask a stupid question? Like,
Right.
I'm not going to know it's stupid unless I ask, right?
Yeah.
And if I get back a really nasty answer, well, deal. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's life. And you just go on, you move on. And, I'm actually friends with those people today. I kind of consider Tony Lee to be an acquaintance. I know Tony pretty well. I've met him here and there. And yet I've gotten some really bad emails from Tony Lee. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I asked stupid questions and he gave me the answer. And he wasn't happy about having to answer it. And that's cool. I understand. He was busy. He's doing stuff. I got it. It's fine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And Hank Schmidt, who was the ISIS guy, I have some very funny stories about Hank and emails from Hank and stuff. But he's a great guy. I still talk to him. And, you just have to put your fireproof suit on and just go do stuff. And it just is what it is. You can't be a shrinking violet. You got to be willing to ask stupid questions and just let it be.
I would say, I mean, I agree to that, but I think in order to build out that resiliency and in order to build out that bulletproof mindset that you just mentioned, for me, it took many, many years
Oh
and it
yeah. Oh,
took,
this is not. Yeah, this is not an
yeah,
overnight thing.
and it took a lot of small wins, right? Like it
Yeah.
took me to be multidimensional so that when I get, knocked down on one and I still fall back on, I don't know, my family and, my
Hmm.
daughters, I mean, like they're always love me and, it doesn't matter how many stupid questions I asked. And for sure, I've asked my share of stupid questions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the great thing is to go ask your daughter, like, ask them the same question you asked this really smart person, and they go, "I don't know, Dad." And you say, "See, well, see, maybe it wasn't a stupid question."
Yeah, there's one other person or two other person. I have two daughters, so that
Yeah.
are in the same boat, and we're just
Yeah.
like hug each other and go
Yeah.
either
Oh
go run
well.
on some grass or something, right? Like you said.
Yeah. Exactly. Whatever. It
Yeah,
is what it
whatever.
is. Keep going.
Unconditional love.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if you decide to write and people are like, "Oh, but it's so much work," and "Oh, I'm going to get really torn up by the editor." Good. Good. I'm happy.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Like the first couple of books I wrote, you should have seen them. Oh, you should have seen my dissertation.
Mm.
If my feelings got hurt by red ink, I would be totally a little puddle of crying on the floor. But hey, I don't know. It makes me a better writer. That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, for
That's
sure.
that. That's their goal, is to make you a better writer, to make the text better. Good. You know, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I think I read this on Gary Vee's blog post at some or Twitter post on the other day where it's like, yeah, your first everything is gonna suck, but if you don't go past that first one, you never get to your 100th one where it's excellent.
That's right.
Um, yeah, so I totally roger with that. Um,
Yeah.
I I think it's been a great session, Russ. I mean, I truly enjoy what you talk about going back to the basics, the mind maps, and then adding breath later on, and you put the money where your mouth is, right? You got your PhD in philosophy
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah. Yeah.
adding so much breadth and your trail of works is a proof to that. So I thank you again for
Yeah.
sharing
Well,
those knowledge.
thanks
Um,
for having me on, Eric. These are great podcasts, by the way.
well, thank you. I mean, both of the listeners enjoyed it, I think.
Both of the listeners.
Yeah,
I'm sure
exactly.
you.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
sure
sorry
you
you
have.
waste your time to talk to
No,
like four people
no.
in total, but
I'm sure you have as many listeners as I do on the hedge.
no, no, no.
I, I
That's for
complain to
sure not true.
I complain to Ethan all the time about the number of listeners I have on the hedge, and he's like, "Yeah, but the market for packet pushers is like 100,000 people or 1 million people in the world. The market for your podcast is like 1,000 people, so don't complain."
No, but it's 80% penetration, right? Like 80% saturated and yeah, it's 1,000, but you got high penetration.
Yeah,
But
well, that's what he's always saying. He's always like,
no, it's true. It's
"Your
true.
market's so small. What are you complaining about?"
No, the denominator is small, but hey, your percentage of adaptation is high. So where can people find your work? Where can people follow you? I know we mentioned last episode, but do you mind just
Yeah,
reminding us
that's
again?
fine. Yeah. Rule11.tech is the primary place that you can follow me. I'm on
Yep.
LinkedIn. You can PM me there. Most of the time, if it's an interesting question that's more than just a simple thing, I'm just going to give you my email address and you can just email me from there. Because like I don't do social media very well. It's just not a thing
Yeah.
with me. Yeah, so rule11.tech, you can find most of my stuff. I cross post everything I write there. I try to. Sometimes I forget, but I really try hard to cross post everything there. And anything I'm teaching at Pearson or whatever, I try to post something there so that people know it's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I whenever you teach, I try to make time for it, and when the new podcast comes out, at least I'll read through the description and
Yeah,
try to
yeah,
listen to it.
yeah. I've
Yeah,
been trying to post transcripts that are just done by a machine thing.
yes,
I kind of forget sometimes to push all the right buttons, and then the
yeah.
way that the podcast service works is I have to wait like 3 days and then I sometimes forget to go back and
To
grab the
click OK.
yeah, to actually grab the URL for the transcript and put it in,
Yeah,
yeah, show notes and everything. So I don't
yeah.
know. It's just one of those things.
Well, no problem. I mean, a lot of these, it's not like you're getting paid, right? So,
Yeah, no,
thank you
absolutely.
for all of these stuff. And like I said, whenever you teach, I listen. So thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Thank you for listening to Network Automation Notes podcast today. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other major podcast platforms. Until next time, bye bye.